Hey guys, Brian from Boas here. I've been really busy lately shipping out a lot of boas. I want to thank you guys who've purchased boas and who've expressed interest in my boas. And I really appreciate all of the great homes that you guys are giving to these beautiful animals. Today I wanted to answer some of the commonly asked questions I get about what to expect when you're buying a boa from me, or for that matter from anyone, since a lot of what I'm going to say also applies to other boa breeders. And I don't necessarily want you to get the boa from me. I want you to get the boa from the breeder that you're the most comfortable with and has the boa for you. But I'm hoping that you'll like some of my boas and that you'll trust my experience in purchasing your next boa. And so I also wanted to specifically comment on feeding of baby boas once you get them, since there's been quite a few questions lately about that and also some misunderstanding. So if you've purchased a boa that I'm going to ship out, or if you just purchased a boa, or you're thinking about purchasing a boa, you definitely want to stay tuned for this one. And so once you've paid for your boa, I'll reach out to you and I'll set up a potential date for shipping. And I'm only going to ship on a day when you're available to go pick up your animal at the nearest FedEx ship center. And so you can pick up the boa all day at the ship center. You don't have to be there right in the morning when it arrives. And most of the ship centers are open till sometimes 6 or 7 at night, although it varies by ship center. So if you have work that day, you can go after work and pick it up. I do ask though that you pick up the boa on the day that it arrives rather than having it sit there overnight. And so when you pick up the boa, I would like you to go home immediately so that you can unpack the package, you can check everything out, and you can let me know how it looks and if there's any issues with the boa. And I always follow up with my customers on the day of shipping just to make sure everything's okay, make sure that if they have any questions that I can answer them and hopefully get them all set for a really good experience with their boa. And you also notice that when you open up the package, you'll see this card. I will include the feeding record card with your boa. So you definitely want to hold on to this card. I've got these index cards for each of my baby boas, and I write down when it's born, when it sheds, when it eats, as well as the type of food, okay? So you definitely want to hold on to this. And if you can't read my writing, I know my writing isn't the best, just let me know and I can decipher it for you. But this will let you know what your boa's feeding history is and give you a pretty good idea about what to feed your boa, which I'm going to talk about a lot more in a minute. But first I wanted to address a topic that I've been getting quite a few people commenting on lately, and that's the size of my baby boas. And some people have commented that they're surprised by how small the boa is, and they had this idea based on the videos or the pictures that it was somehow larger. Well, I think a lot of people are confused as to how big boas are when they're born. And they've seen these boas at their local pet shop, and these boas are, maybe 2 to 3 feet long. Those are often year-old boas. And I remember when I was a kid going to the pet shop, I would see boas about that size, and I would think they were babies, but no, those are actually yearling boas. And just to illustrate, I have here a 1.5-year-old croquis boa and a one born this year that's only about 6 months old. And you can see quite a bit of difference. I mean, I wouldn't call this a huge animal. This is actually smaller than most of those year-old boas I saw at the pet shop as a kid. But this one you can see is quite tiny. This is like the size of a colubrid of the same age. And many of these dwarf boas, they're about the same size as like a large colubrid, like a pine snake or king snake or even a large corn snake. They're really not all that big. I mean, they're eating fuzzy mice. So you're not going to get a boa that's that big until it's a few, that may be the size you thought it was until it's a few years old. That's normal. I don't know if these videos, because maybe I'm using a wide angle lens and it's kind of forced perspective, maybe if I hold them back here they don't look quite as big. Maybe they look big against my hands. I mean, I have pretty decent sized hands, so I don't think my hands are small and make them look bigger, but whatever. Just be prepared that your boa might not be quite as big as you expect. And if you really want a boa that's not small like this, you probably want to go for a year-old boa. And by the way, I have quite a few of my 2024 morph boas still available. They're bigger, they're more well started, they're better feeding, And I'll talk more about that in a second, but just be prepared that your boa might not be as big as you expect. So once you've gotten your boa home, what I would recommend that you do is that you put it into its enclosure. And if you have a collection, I would recommend that you quarantine it away from the rest of your collection. But you want an enclosure where it can rest and acclimate for at least a few days before doing anything. So during this period, which I would recommend at least 3 to 5 days, that you don't really disturb your boa very much and you don't feed it during that period. And you can hold it, you can check it out. I know you're excited, you have a new boa, but I wouldn't recommend handling it for more than a few minutes, and just put it in the enclosure, give it a hiding place, don't disturb it, let it just rest and recover and start to acclimate to its new home. And I don't ship a boa that has fed within 7 days, so it'll be at least a week before after the last feeding before I ship your boa. You don't want to ship a boa that has a full stomach, of course. So your boa will be ready to feed typically within a few days. Sometimes it's more like 2 weeks. And some people say don't feed the boa for at least a week. That's not always true. So if a boa hasn't eaten for like a week and a half, you can give it like a few days to acclimate, and then you can offer it food. And I would actually prefer that you do this just so that you can be comfortable, that if you have any questions, you can reach out to me and we can figure out what's going on ASAP. And the baby boas I sell fall into really 3 categories as far as feeding. And they've all eaten at least 4 times voluntarily. Okay, so this is on their own. They've eaten at least a live mouse, typically a fuzzy or hopper sized mouse. And I won't ship a boa until they've eaten at least 4 times like that. However, some of them are not yet eating thawed frozen mice. And some animals are easier to get to feed on thawed frozen than others. Probably the most challenging are the island boas, like the quail key and cocker key, things like that. And so I can try getting them onto thawed frozen, but in some cases they won't always be. Just please ask me specifically if you have any questions, if you can't feed a live mouse to your boa, and I can advise you about which ones are a better choice for you. And I actually did offer many of my quail key and tarahumara boas at the last feeding. I offered them thawed frozen, and quite a few actually ate it. Probably about half of them. So I do have 5 born tarahumara and quail key now that are on thawed frozen. And you know what I figured out is that not all thawed frozen are the same. If a thawed frozen mouse is nice and fresh, it hasn't been frozen that long, it's got more of the natural scent, and that boas are more likely to take it. Often when you buy thawed frozen rodents from the major rodent suppliers, they've been sitting in the freezer for a long time and they've lost that scent, so they're not quite as appealing and your boa may not like it. So keep that in mind if you have an animal that has just started on thawed frozen. You want to get the freshest thawed frozen that you can. So I'd say the first category of boas as far as feeding are those that aren't yet on the thawed frozen, and that's some of my island boas that I just talked about, like the quail key and also the tarahumara dwarf. They've not all eaten thawed frozen. So in that case, you may need to have access to live baby mice or live, hopper-sized mice for at least probably a few weeks or a month or 2. Maybe you can get them locally from your local pet shop, or you have your own breeding colony, or someone that breeds mice. But just be aware of that. The ones that I have now that have just started, hopefully, when I ship them out, they'll be fine eating whatever thawed frozen. But as I said, some of the thawed frozen are not as appealing to the babies as the more fresh stuff. But make sure you talk to me about that if you have any questions. If you absolutely cannot feed live, if you only have the really old freezer rodents that have been in the freezer a long time, which actually I wouldn't recommend because they're not as nutritious. But if you don't have really nice, fresh, appealing thawed frozen, you want to get a boa like this one. This is a year-old 2024 morph boa. This guy's a hypo jungle. And these guys eat like tanks on thawed frozen or whatever. I mean, they're not picky at all. That's, I would call, my category number 2, the boas that are just so established on thawed frozen that is absolutely no problem. And if you're a beginner or you just want to pet or you don't want to worry about feeding, this is the way to go. Okay. And then incidentally, I have several of these nice hypo jungles, and they're het for VPIT positive. It's from my 2024 morph litter. Really nice animals. They're really dirt cheap. They're hardly more expensive than just normal boas. And I think that maybe these hypo jungles is just not a sexy new morph, because both hypo and jungle are relatively old morphs. They're not all that expensive on their own. And people just don't like them. They're kind of like base morphs. Like you put other more exciting genes like IMG or VPI on top of these, but this just hypo jungle. But there are really cool boas. And I mean, when you think about the difference in the phenotype between this and a normal boa, it's quite striking. So if you want a pet boa, you can't go wrong with a boa like this. And as I mentioned, I have about maybe 10 or so morph boas left from 2024 that are still available. You can check them out on my Flickr page. Link is below the video description. If the link is still not working, just send me an email and I'll send you the link. But that's category number 2. Finally, the third feeding category applies to my true red-tailed boas from Suriname, like these ones. And they fall into a completely different class as far as what to expect when feeding. And first off, I thought I would show you, for size comparison, a 2025 born boa versus a 2024 born Suriname true red-tailed. You can see how much smaller the 2025 born one looks. And I think a lot of the people, like I said with the qual key comparison earlier, a lot of people were expecting you to get this size boa when they got this size, but this is a normal size for a newly born, or actually, a few months old Suriname red-tail. You can see the considerable difference. And these Surinames grow quite slowly the first year, so not until they reach about 1.5 to 2 years do they start looking more muscular like this one. But with Surinames, as you probably know, and other red-tails, a major issue that can happen is regurgitation, where the animals vomit up their food a few days after eating it. It can be caused by quite a few different causes. I've done several videos on it in the past, so check those out. I'm not going to talk about it in detail here, but it's something you absolutely want to avoid, because if your animal regurgitates more than once, it gets harder and harder to stop it, and it's the leading cause of death among baby true red tails. So with the Suriname boas, the regurgitation can be caused by temperatures that are too hot or too cold, dehydration, lack of humidity, stress, meals that are too big, meals that are too not fresh enough, and other factors as well. And stress definitely plays a role. And when you ship a boa to a new home, there is some amount of stress that's just unavoidable. So I've had some animals go out and they're perfectly healthy, they haven't regurgitated, and then the person feeds it, they seem to be doing everything right, but it starts regurgitating. And typically we can figure this out. We can do the steps that I've outlined in my videos, and the animal goes on to recover. But it's really stressful for the owner, it's stressful for the animal, so it's something that hopefully we can avoid as much as possible. But if you buy a true red tail, just please be advised, these animals are not nearly as robust as babies as many of the other boas. They're a lot more delicate. You really have to handle them with kid gloves. And this is one of the reasons I don't really recommend them as pets for first-time boa owners. There's no reason why you can't have a Suriname red tail as your first boa, provided you're willing to put in the research and the homework before getting it and give it ideal husbandry conditions. But they definitely are a little more delicate than the other types of boas. And I really want you to keep that in mind. I know the Surinames have breathtaking colors and people are blown away by how they look. But for many people, their best bet for a pet boa is not going to be one of these guys. It's going to be more like a Colombian or morph type boa rather than a true red tail, just because of the risk and the likelihood of regurgitation if everything isn't set up perfectly, the perfect right conditions. And I just wanted to end the video by showing you guys another example of a 2024 born morph boa that's now about 1.5 years old, very robust, eating like a pig on whatever thawed frozen rodent you want to give it, and just doing great. And as I mentioned, I have about a dozen other morph boas from 2024 currently available, like this one. This is actually a hypo jungle IMG boa. You can see the beautiful dark coloration coming in from the IMG, but also the light areas from the hypo, just a really cool morph. This one's het for VPIT positive, and so hopefully we should be producing VPI-IMG combos in another few years as these animals get bigger. And in fact, I think I'm going to pair up my IMG boas again in 2026. So hopefully some more really nice IMG combos are on the way for next summer, so please stay tuned for those. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and it gave you some food for thought as far as what to expect with your new baby boa. Please reach out to me with any questions. You can also write them in the comments below. Thanks for watching and enjoy your boas.